Okay, and welcome to Happy Hour with me. I am Eileen Cook, and it is June 5th. So, Peggy, before I jump into anything, was there any specific questions you had that you wanted tackled?
Not off the top of my head. I tried to come up with some to send you, but felt like I'd been taking a lot of your time in the last few weeks, so thought I'd let somebody else get a chance.
Well, that's why I'm here. So, one, I will let everyone know, and I will repeat it at the end of the session today. But next week, I'm going to pre-record office hours.
Okay.
So if people send me questions, I will be answering those. And that is because for whatever reason, BC Hydro is replacing the pole outside of my house, and they are turning off my power for 12 hours.
Nice.
So I will not have Wi-Fi at all on Tuesday. And rather than trying to do it from a library or a coffee shop where I just had visions of it going badly, I'm going to take questions. And if I don't get questions, or even if I do, depending on how many I have, I'm going to tackle, people have heard of Chekhov's gun.
Yes.
So I have some interesting things to say about that. So I think it'll be an interesting session about how you can potentially use it. So that's coming up next Tuesday. I will pre-record it, so it will go up on Tuesday morning. So it'll be like we're all together for those of you that have Wi-Fi. But for those of us who don't and have no power at all, I'll just be working by my lonesome.
By candlelight.
Yes, by candlelight, not opening my fridge to try and keep things from spoiling. So what I wanted to talk about was kind of a little bit of a carryover from some of what we talked about last week, which was getting more emotion on the page. So I talked to a couple other writers, which first off, I think is one of those great things to do. When I was talking to the other writers, we talked about the value that comes in having a community of writers. And this group is part of that. Like, this is something where you just feel a little bit less alone. But I also find like talking to other people sort of helps you articulate what's going on for me, what is the thing that I'm struggling with, and how do other people tackle that. So I was talking about emotion, and that got me kind of down a rabbit hole where I was looking up some things online and talking to other writers. So the first thing we all agreed on is if you want to get more emotion from the reader. So we want the reader's emotions to be flagged. That, of course, one of the first things that you can do is pull out books that have a strong emotional factor for you. So if there is a book that has made you cry, or where you have felt anxious at the edge of your seat, or, you know, if Stephen King has ever scared the pants off of you, to kind of go back and first read those scenes and identify what was it that made that work. So strangely enough, I mentioned Stephen King because one of the scenes that I still remember so very vividly comes from his book, The Stand. And in The Stand, of course, it's this post-apocalyptic, which don't read it now because it makes you think about Trump being in office. So there's this sort of horrible thing. But separate from that, there's this basically people are all dying off from the flu. And there is a scene where the main character, whose name I still can't remember, is with a couple of other characters whose names I also can't remember. And they're escaping New York, and they have to go through the Holland Tunnel. And there's this scene about them going through the tunnel, which is full of cars that have stopped halfway because the people, you know, can't move any further. You know, basically people were dying as they were trying to evacuate. So it is this whole scene of this guy going through this incredibly long tunnel that's very dark because there's no power on anymore, passing cars that are full of dead bodies. And it's quite interesting because I still remember the scene, and I actually think of it whenever I drive through tunnels, like when I go through the Cassiar connector, for example. I always have this moment about what it would be like to be stuck in that tunnel. And really what he built was this whole sense of sort of claustrophobia and this sense of dread about what was going to be in each of the cars as he would kind of walk up to it. He would give you this little tiny peek, but not give you everything. But you knew it wasn't going to be like, oh, and this car's full of puppies and unicorns. Like, you knew it was going to be bad. But it was that dread that really built. So it would be interesting. And in fact, I requested it from the library because I no longer own a copy of The Stand. But I want to pull that scene up and read it again and really take a look at how did he build the emotion for the reader in that scene. But certainly we agree that first thing you can do is learn from other writers. That's always an agreement. The second thing is you have to know yourself. What emotion are you trying to elicit in the reader? And in fairness, if you're doing a first draft, maybe you're not worried about it at that moment. And that's okay. Like, I'm a big believer that I think one of the things that I struggled with a lot is when I first started writing, I just wrote. And I can't say that it was necessarily good, but I would write. And then I started to get more serious about the craft, and I started to learn more and more things. And that helped. But there was a weird pivot point where I started to learn so many things that it actually locked me up. Because I would go to start writing and I would start thinking, have I identified the emotion? Is this coming in strong? What's my goal, motivation, conflict? How is the scene coming in? How is it coming out? Is the dialogue have too many dialogue tags? I think it does. Oh my God, I have adverbs everywhere. Ah! And I would stop. So I always want, you're laughing because it's true.
Oh, yeah, that's where I am.
So I would stop myself. So eventually I had to get to a point where I realized knowing craft has two things. One is it is sticking around in the back of your head even when you're not thinking about it. And that's where it needs to stay when you're doing the writing part. When you bring it to the front of your brain is when you're doing the revision part. So I say this as, if you don't know the emotion, like, don't stop yourself if you're writing a scene and be like, I don't know what emotion she's supposed to feel. I don't know. Like, if that helps you to ask those prompts, then ask them. But if you just want to start writing, start writing. And then when you're reviewing the scene, ask yourself, what's the emotion I want the reader to walk away with? Once you know that, I want the reader to feel scared. I want the reader to feel that they're falling in love. Whatever that emotion is, I think the second question that you're asking yourself is this an emotion that the reader is sharing with the character? Or is this an emotion that the character may not be aware of, but that you want the reader to feel? And that second one is a little bit more complicated, so we're going to take that one second. And we're first going to tackle if it's the same thing your character feels. And this is a little bit of what we talked about last week with the idea of having that kind of deeper POV. So, okay, I've identified that I want this character to feel scared. And as I said last week, first identify and dig a little bit deeper, like, what kind of scared am I talking about? Am I talking about uneasy? Am I talking about anxious? Or am I talking about terrified? So I have a character that's going to a doctor's appointment to get some test results. How do they feel about waiting? You know, they're waiting for the doctor to come in. Is that just the, like, I'm sure everything's fine. I don't know why they called me in, but they do that sometimes. I'm sure it's fine. I'm in, perfect health. I'm sure it's no big deal. That's just that kind of uneasy kind of thing. Are they feeling more anxious? This has been a problem. I know this is a problem. What's he going to say? If he says this, what am I going to do? I don't have enough health insurance because I live in a place that doesn't have health insurance, or I can't take any time off of work. I have no sick time. Like, how can you build that sense of anxiety? Because anxiety is around, how am I necessarily going to handle a situation? Unease is usually, I'm not really sure what I feel. Terrified's a whole different level. So terrified might have to be with, my mom, my two sisters, and my grandmother all died of breast cancer, and I had to redo that mammogram. And I know what it's going to say, and I am just piss your pants scared about how I'm going to cope with that. Having said that, all of those might be kind of meshed in together. The character might be feeling a little bit uneasy and a little bit of this and terrified at the same time. People are rarely kind of one emotion. But you may even show that building. So you may show that they're uneasy when they get to the doctor's office, but they have an interaction with the nurse that makes them think, uh-oh, like, she's acting really weird. Like, the doctor will want to see you alone.
What'd you say that for?
Yeah, like, did you drive yourself here? Could someone pick you up if they needed to? Like, why? Why does somebody need to pick me up? Like, you can really imagine where you could ratchet someone who is uneasy about getting test results. I mean, I'm uneasy when I go to the doctor anyway. Like, I just don't like to be at the doctor. But if the nurse said something like, oh, did you drive yourself today? Did anyone come with you? Like, I would be like, they're about to tell me something really bad. Something really, really bad is happening. And then terror would be when basically that feeling just runs amok. And you're truly have gone from being, I'm a little anxious or nervous about this, to I am terrified. And, I'm pulling out terrified is I'm being chased by a bear kind of thing, right? To me, it's the difference between, oh, I'm home all alone and it's dark and the lights went out, I'm uneasy, to anxious, I heard a funny sound downstairs. It sounded like glass breaking, to terrified, there's a guy standing there with a knife. That's kind of ratcheting those things up. And you can imagine how you could show that building, for example, for a character. But going from, oh, I want my character to feel scared, to really trying to nail that specific emotion will make a really big difference with your writing, because then you can tackle those next steps. So, 1, does the reader feel empathy for your main character? So we're going to take the same woman at the doctor's office. If she's annoying and irritating, part of me thinking like, I hope you do have cancer, you miserable SOB. If you died in chapter 2, I would not be remotely sorry. And this is often why, if you hear editors or agents talk about, in an opening scene, sometimes people are trying to have a high emotion, high impact scene. And that can be very hard to do, because in an opening scene, we don't yet know who that character is. So I might feel bad, but I don't have any emotional connection to that character yet to feel personally connected. Right? So that can be why. So have you built empathy with the character? Does the reader like your main character? Do they have a reason to be in your character's main corner? That can certainly help with sort of showing and feeling that emotion. Because if your character feels it and I like them, that two-parter, then I am much more inclined to feel that thing with them. Then second part of that is, am I showing that emotion? So if we identified that I feel anxious because the nurse has asked me if I've driven myself. So how can I show that anxiety? So maybe I start picking and peeling at my manicure that I just got, right? Like, and I'm chipping away at the nail polish. That certainly would show anxiety. Now you could show it through internal thoughts like, why in the hell is she asking me if I came by myself, right? That would also show that anxiety through internal thought. It might be something like, I feel Eileen was glad she'd only had boiled chicken for lunch. If she'd had the pizza, she was sure it would come back up. Whatever that is, like I'm picking at, like my bra suddenly feels too tight and I'm pulling at it, and anything that would sort of show that anxiety, rather than saying, Eileen felt anxious. So one thing that can help with emotion, something to consider, is, does that emotion come as a surprise to the character? And that's sort of expectation versus reality. So I've gone into the doctor's office because I just want to renew my birth control. And that's when the nurse says to me, did you drive yourself? The doctor would like to speak to you. Like, I'm anticipating, I'm just coming in, I'm going to get some pills and then I'm out, right? Like, I got stuff to do, right? So it becomes as a surprise. You don't always have to have surprise, but surprise can be like, I'm planning my wedding next week, and then the doctor gives me this information. You have a health concern. Or I just discovered I'm pregnant and now you're telling me I have cancer. So am I going to be able to carry this baby to term, or am I going to have to wait to get chemo until the child is born? Like, that kind of surprise will hit us with emotion. And I think most of us can think of those own experiences in our life where something came out of nowhere, and therefore it has sometimes a much bigger hit. So the phone call that comes in the middle of the night that unfortunately there's been a car accident and someone you care for is gone. Terror is certainly an easy one to play with that. Like, I didn't know anything was happening. I went downstairs to feed the dog and there was the guy with the knife there. That's going to have a big kind of jolt reaction. So surprise can be something to play with that. Because surprise is often leading to those strong emotions, pain, fear, all the rage, betrayal. So again, I'm going downtown to meet my husband for lunch, and I discover him in the arms of another woman. As the reader, I'm going to be like, no, he didn't, right? Like, and I'm going to have that feeling potentially with her, especially again, if you've built empathy. That doesn't mean you have to have surprise, because you can have the exact opposite, where you want to build to this emotional scene for a long time. So for the same character who just found out her husband's having an affair, if it was a case like you had a scene before where he was late, or they had a strange stilted reaction, and she herself is like, I'm feeling like something's not right, we're not connecting, and that's why I'm going downtown to surprise him for lunch, because I'm wearing nothing but saran wrap under here, right? So this is going to be a big surprise. And then this happens to me. That's a sense of sort of slowly building to that emotion. And the reader is anticipating along with the character that we kind of maybe know what's coming. Again, if you've ever had the misfortune of having a relative who might be really quite ill, and you know that the end is coming, it's just going to be, so every time the phone rings, there's that moment where you're like, is this going to be the call? Is this, what's that going to be? Then you're building that, and along with the character, there's that kind of, it's finally here moment of when you finally deal with it. And often what you'll see, for example, in Death and Dying, is people who might be great at handling, for example, during the period of hospice care, because there's things that they need to do, there's things they need to be planning for. But when the individual dies, they'll suddenly crash emotionally. And people will say, but, you knew your mom was dying, you knew she was in care, but it was somehow still not real because I was able to focus on these other things. But as the reader, we also know it's undeniable, even if we know that the character knows that too. Like, we know that they're kind of trying to deny that. So that can be that. So those are all ways that I would build emotion if it was the same as what the character is feeling. Now, the other is less about sort of techniques, but just something to consider, which is if you want the reader to feel something that the character isn't yet feeling. So I'm going to give an example. I've had a scene where I'm going back and forth. And so it is a scene of a teen girl being abducted from the soccer field by a guy who puts her in a box in his closet. And I know that. And then the next scene is the character's mom, who is getting ready for her teen daughter's birthday. So her emotion is she's going to be so surprised when she gets home. I've called all her friends here, but there's balloons and there's cake, and I'm feeling excited and happy. And there's, a knock on the door, which is going to be the police. So as the reader, as I'm reading about how happy she is for this party, I'm feeling sick to my stomach because I know something she doesn't know. And that is usually exactly what's happening if the reader is feeling something that your character isn't. The reader has some piece of knowledge that the character doesn't. So, for example, if you're writing a romance and the character has their heart broken in an early chapter by a guy that I, as the reader, clearly know is a dick and a loser, and she's going to fall in love with this other guy who's going to be so much better for her. While I'll feel sad that she's sad, I'm mostly like, yay, like, because you had to give him up why were you seeing that guy? I want her to give that guy up so that she can fall in love with the right guy. So it's usually a case that the reader has some piece of information. So I know that your kid is actually alive, even though the police have told you we found blood at the site, and it's so much blood. If it's your daughter, she's surely gone, because I know the creepy guy brought a bag of blood. He worked at the Red Cross and he spilled blood at the scene because he wanted it to look like she was dead. Or I have dread because I know there's somebody waiting downstairs to attack my character, but she has no idea. So she's washing her face and she's, having these thoughts, and I'm having that moment of like, there's a guy standing in your like if you pulled the curtain back in the bathroom, he would be there.
You're creeping me out just telling me that.
I'm home alone tonight too. So later I'm going to be like, why did I talk about that? Why do I have all these windows that don't have good covering?
Well, better tonight than next week before your lights go out.
Yeah, no, they're getting like, yeah, I might just not be home when the lights are out. I might just not be here. But those are the two different kinds of things. So a big recap of all of that is, first, I always think the best thing we can do is learn from the books that we love. So if there's a book that you enjoyed, like the last book that made you cry, or where you had that like, yes moment, like when something wonderful happened, or you felt turned on, or romantic feelings, or whatever that was, where you had that emotional impact, kind of going back and trying to figure out, what did that person do? And then for your own, identify the emotion that the character has. Even if that changes in the scene, drill down so you really can capture what emotion that is. And then lastly, decide if that emotion is shared by the character, in which case use those various techniques to kind of try and show that emotion on the page. Or if it isn't shared by the character, then often setting up kind of a strong contrast can make that work really well. So if I'm showing you and telling you there's a killer in the bathroom hiding in the tub, and, and he's breathing in and out and, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to go any further because I'll scare myself. And at the same time, you're like, if I suddenly go like this, you'll know what happened. But if the character is feeling, then happy or really excited about something, that will build that contrast even better and have the reader feeling even more strongly about that. So those are the emotion tips. Questions or thoughts about that?
Love the go back and look at books, because Stephen King, whenever people say who is, your favorite authors, and I remember being in a writing program and everybody was talking Proust and different, really highfalutin, and they got to me and I said, well, Stephen King, because he's the only author that has made me throw a book down in terror. It was Pet Sematary.
Yep.
Well,
now that you're writing, make sure you reread Misery.
Oh, yes, that's another one.
You can have some good nightmares.
Another one. There's some really, I love that idea. So yeah, this is all really good. And there's a couple of scenes in my book that I'm like, okay, I want to go back now and review that based on this recent advice.
Yay. And I'm going to put a plug in, because I think Stephen King is one of the most underrated writers.
I agree.
In part because he's writing genre fiction. And so there's a sense of he's doing it for the filthy money, or it's a horror novel, so it can't ever be a great work. And here's the thing is, he does tap into that emotion. And I think he does two things particularly well. One is emotion. He will make you feel fear. And, if you take a look back through, you can see like how he's building that in a scene. And the second thing I think he does really well is just drill into a character's head. And those are very, like when I go back and I've looked at his stuff, because I think he does characters some of the best way possible, is like if you look at Misery, for example, and how he describes, I can't think of the main, Kathy Bates' character's name, because she played it in the movie, like what she's wearing, the things in her house. Like he picks very specific details. She has that way of talking and about like, well, oogly boogly kind of like she has this very different and unique speech pattern, but she felt so real to me.
Yeah.
she felt completely three-dimensional to me. And he does that with tiny throwaway characters. A character who might be a waitress who walks on in one scene just to ask a question, and then we never see her again. She never feels generic waitress to me. She always feels specific. So I am a huge believer, and I think we pick up a lot of things by osmosis. So I tell people, some people are like, well, I don't like to read the genre that I'm writing in because I'm afraid I'm going to contaminate myself. And I get that, but I think there's a real benefit from doing it too. So if you're wanting to write chick lit, like get all the shopaholic books, get the, I Know What You Did, all those kinds of things, so that you are recognizing the patterns and you'll start to see what they're doing that makes that work. And I think you then can deliberately go back to your own work and start asking yourself the question of like, how could I do that better? So maybe instead of, the JD, what would Jesus do bracelets, if you've ever seen those, you're going to have one that says like, WWS do. What would Stephen do? Like, how would Stephen write this scene? How would he describe this character? And that can sometimes be something to do. I mean, I think that's why fan fiction is so popular, is sometimes writing in someone else's voice is easier than our own, but I think it can often help us discover what it is we're trying to say and do.
And any excuse to go back and read all the Stephen King books is a great thing.
There you go. You're welcome. So going back and reading those would be useful. Or, looking for, again, if there's anything that's similar to like, I'm trying to write a book that's a little bit like X or Y. Is there anything similar to that? So I was talking to another writer who's trying to do kind of multiple point of view. And so we talked about doing things like Little Big Lies by Leanna Moriarty is a wonderful mystery example. Another one that I really loved is a book called The Party by Robin Harding. And it's not a high stakes thriller, but what she's doing with that is giving you a scenario and then rotating between the different points of view. And she just does it, I think, extremely well. And you can start seeing, okay, how did she go along? Like, are we getting the same information, but from different people's point of view? Or is she using each character to kind of push the story forward? So I don't always know everything. So you can just sort of get some ideas about how might I use that same technique to my advantage. Because of course, there's certainly a lot of different ways to do that.
I do have one question about emotion.
Yes.
The book I'm working on has a lot of emotion going on.
Good.
I find sometimes I'm running into a problem of finding different ways when a character is in a scenario throughout the book where they're anxious or scared, or their reactions are often similar, like their physical reactions. They have the same sort of tells. How do you keep describing the same sort of things without repeating yourself over and over again?
So two ways is you might make sure that you are trying to vary some of that emotion differently. So instead of that they're always terrified, that they are uneasy, they are anxious, they are scared, they are terrified.
Right.
And then saying, like, you could almost take yourself a little line and say, how would I show uneasy versus anxious versus scared versus terrified? What would those look or feel like differently? And you might then go back in your own mind and try and think about when is a time you felt that. What's the difference between I'm irritated, I'm angry, and I'm enraged? And I think we often blur those because we say, oh, like when I'm angry, like I can just feel my blood boiling, I can feel a headache starting, but kind of go back and be like, what is the difference? Because I'm betting there are some subtle differences. And then lastly, and I'm going to feel like a rock star if you haven't heard of this resource, have you heard of the Emotional Thesaurus?
Oh, I don't know if I've got, there's another one that's recommended, but I don't think the emotional one was.
I love when this happens. I will put a link into it when I put up the office hours.
Oh, I love it.
And in fact, we have our very own Crystal at the Creative Academy is going to be interviewing Angela, who is the author of the Emotional Thesaurus.
Oh, cool.
That's coming up in June or July, I think. So she's taking questions. So you might, if you check it out, then you can definitely be asking her some pointed questions on the issue. But the Emotional Thesaurus is pretty much exactly like what it sounds like. You look up an emotion and then they list a whole bunch of different physical ways to describe that.
I'm just looking on my bookshelf because I know I have a whole bunch, but I don't think the emotional is one of them. I don't see it. Nope.
Yay, another excuse for Cliff.
Book shopping.
So if you go on their website, let me see if I can easily find it here without hanging up on this meeting, which is a skill.
I'm not even going to try.
Yeah, like everybody stay tuned. Okay. You're watching me in real time, use Google. Okay. So it's Angela Ackerman and Becca Puglisi are the two authors. So the one that I often use is the Emotional Thesaurus. And I have that myself. I have a copy. Of course, I don't have it right in my hot hands at the moment, but you can imagine it. But she's also done the Emotional Wound Thesaurus, a writer's guide to psychological trauma, Emotion Amplifiers.
Oh, good. Wow.
The Positive Trait Thesaurus, a writer's guide to character attributes, the Negative Trait Thesaurus, a writer's guide to character flaws, Urban Setting Thesaurus, Rural Setting Thesaurus. So she has quite a few, and now I'm going to see if I can find one more thing. They have a website, which I'm trying to remember what the heck of the name of the darn thing is. OneStopForWriters.com.
Can't believe I haven't found this yet.
Well, you can't find everything because otherwise I feel useless. So.
Well, I'm glad I can help.
Yes, thank you so much. Otherwise, be like, of course, Eileen, I've heard it a million times. So you'll see that they have a bunch of sort of, all the thesaurus are on there for you. And I believe you can get like a membership to the different things and get all of them online. That's what I'm trying to find. But they have a couple new ones. They have a talent and skills thesaurus, which is kind of nice.
Ooh, fun.
So here we go. So yeah, they actually have a lot of this, like just samples available. But if you want to view the entirety, you can log in and sign up. But they have, for example, let's see if I can do this. They show me any of it? Yeah, I know you have to be logged in to subscribe. But for example, they have like acceptance, and then you would click on it and they will give you all the examples of it. Oh, here, this one's working. Now you have to sign in. Dang it. They are well worth a membership if you don't want to buy the print books. Depends what sort of you prefer. But that can be a nice way to change it up.
Oh, yeah, that's a great idea.
The other thing is to see if you start noticing if you have certain tells. So for example, one of mine is eye rolling. I love to have characters roll their eyes. They are like eye rolling like there's no tomorrow. Enough so that I actually have, when I go through and I'm all done with my manuscript, I do a find replace for eye roll. And I scroll and I'm shocked at how many times it shows up because I'm like, I can't believe I did it again. So it can be a way, like if you notice oh, I have her clenching her teeth. It's another one I happen to apparently quite like. I'm a teeth clenching, eye rolling crazy person.
Mine
so I will
deep breaths and sucking in through her teeth and
eye roll. Yours sound like she's in labor. But if you know, okay, sucking in a breath is a big one that I use a lot. Just make yourself a handy little list, and then you can do a search for it at the end. Because I think we all have, and I've said it before, I think we all have certain tells that show up in our writing because they show up in our speech patterns. if the character from Misery was doing this, she would realize that she says things like oogie poogie, right? Like, and it would be like, oh, I describe things that way a lot. That's really oogie. That's one of the, I remember that word from that book. So for her, it would be like, you need to cut out oogie and say, that's disgusting. That's gross. That's distasteful. That's unpleasant. Like, you have to change it up. That's her tell. But we all have certain things that we just rely on.
Yeah.
And knowing what those are, then you can start looking to block them out. In the same way that in speech patterns, I know, for example, we tend to use like and a lot. And if you've ever done Toastmasters or taken a speech class or gone to any kind of media trainer, they'll do a thing where they'll have you, for example, wear a rubber band and snap yourself every time you catch yourself saying, and instead trying to just pause, because all is a verbal silence. I guess, it serves no purpose. So I think in the same way, you're snapping yourself on a rubber band. If you catch yourself using, I always use glanced instead of looked. I always use eye rolling. I'm always sucking in my breath. I'm always teeth clenching. If you start to recognize your own tells, then you can just watch out for them.
Oh, that's a good idea. I'll start keeping a list.
Yeah, I have a handy list that I actually have as a Word document that I just know. And the funny thing is, the more aware you are of it, the more likely you are to catch yourself doing it and possibly swapping it out in the moment. Like eye rolls is one that I've joked about for years, but it used to be, I would get a manuscript back from an editor and there would be like, 171 instances of eye rolling. Now it's the kind of thing when I catch myself typing eye roll, I get that momentary like, oh, hang on. And I think, is there something else I could use? And again, because I don't want to stop myself, because that I'm much more likely to do, then if I'm catching myself, then what I will do is just stop, put in eye roll, and then know I need to go back to it. So one thing that I use that's a big helpful thing is the triple X.
I use that all the time. Stop. It's just X, 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 go.
Keep going, right? And I will, it's easy to search for because they're, unless you're writing porn, like there's not something where you need to have triple X. So for me, if I'm searching for it, it'll pop up in the manuscript. And that can be anything from, I don't know what this building looks like, so I'm trying to describe, for example, my next book takes place in London. And I had actually gone to the Victoria and Albert Museum when I had last been in London and kind of cased the joint out for the scene. But then I realized I couldn't remember what the cafeteria looked like. Like I remembered the tables and the chairs. I remembered the feel and the sound, like I'd made some notes. But I couldn't really, like I was like, I'm pretty sure there were big windows, but I couldn't really remember. So I just put XXX. And then in the revisions, I went back and I Googled things, Google Images, Victoria and Albert Museum, cafeteria, and got some images that I could then go back and fill in. So when in doubt, triple exit and move on. And that can work particularly well sometimes for emotions, or if again, like I know I need to go back to this scene, it's not right. But I need to just keep going for right now. I just triple exit so I know I can find it. Or sometimes I'll put triple X and then in brackets be like, dig deeper for motivation and bracket.
Yeah.
And then just go on. And that will give you kind of just a place to go back to and start with, and it can make a big difference. I'm going to cough. There we go. It's getting much better.
That was a well-timed mute. I'm impressed.
I've become a pro at it over the past couple of weeks because I have allergies and asthma.
Oh, me too. And I was actually, I was logging in tonight, I was like, okay, I get my tissues. Where's the mute button? Because if I start sneezing, I'm going to have to mute it.
And for me, it shows up as this horrible hacking cough because of asthma. And it's very unpleasant. So I'm doing my best to mute it so that other people don't have to hear it. All right. So that is my big thing on emotion. If other people have any questions, a reminder to leave me questions for next week, because I will do a random Q&A. and answer any questions I get, and or we'll be talking about Chekhov's gun because I found a wonderful article about it. So I will be doing that. I will post this likely tomorrow. So if people want to listen, they will. Well, if they're listening, they've already posted it. But I will put in there a link to the Emotional Thesaurus so people can find it. And a reminder that Crystal will be interviewing Angela Ackerman. So if people want to check that out. And if you think you want to buy the Emotional Thesaurus, I'm almost positive we have a coupon for it in our tools area. I'm almost positive. And if not, never mind that I said that. All right. If there are no other questions, you are free for the evening. And I will talk to you soon, but keep me posted on how the project goes. You found a beta reader, I think. Did I hear that?
They're working on a retired librarian to see if there's somebody that was a good fit to not so much be a beta reader, but a read this and see if it makes sense so far. But yeah. Christy does. I'm also working with Christy, and that's a huge help. So I'm meeting her on Friday.
Yay. Well, give her a big hug and a kiss for me.
I will do that. Thank you so much, Eileen. Have a great night.
Have a great night. Bye.